Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this is the second part of The Wasteland for T.S. Eliot. In the previous part, we actually went through the summary of the 5 sections in this poem, okay, and we noticed that the events and the events are not homogeneous, but there were shifts actually from one actually story to another, from one story to another, and we had a monologue, dramatic monologue in which we have only one speaker telling the story, but we don't have characters interacting with each other, and this is another reflection of the alienation of people and disconnection between them. So each one is alone, okay? And we noticed that he alluded to many actually resources in history, in literature, in religion, in order to express his idea that this world after the World War I is full of horror, futility, and alienation. Okay, now let's come to discuss the themes that are in this poem. Okay, sorry, can't see. The brokenness and isolation of modern life. Now the wasteland, okay, and you can connect this with the Brufruk actually. The wasteland can be thought of as a poem about the alienation and brokenness of modern life. Written shortly after World War I, the poem reflects the generational trauma يعني الصدمة, caused by the war, both on the battlefield and the home front. طبعا بالنسبة للمعركة موت العديد وبالنسبة لأهاليهم عائلاتهم. The families lost many of their young men. The wasteland, the poem portrays, represents modern society itself, which Eliot depicts as shallow and isolating, lacking both the spiritual guidance and the cultural abundance of the past. Okay, so this is the modern life in the 20th century. If you remember, people became skeptic and didn't follow a religion, and all of them actually were converting to atheism, اللي هو الإلحاد. So the people had no spiritual guidance, and they didn't see themselves connected with the previous actually history, so they had no cultural abundance of the past. Though the people of the wasteland are simply going about their ordinary lives, their inability to connect or communicate is indicative. Yeah, it was clear that they are unable to connect with their society, because the society is a broken society in which they all live. In the poem's first section, for example, a crowd of people stream across London Bridge like zombies. تخيلوا الناس بتدفقوا على جسر لندن وكأنهم زومبي, suggesting the alienating and deadening effects of the modern world. When the speaker sees a fellow former soldier in the crowd, يعني شاف صديق له سابق من الحرب في الجماهير الماشية, his name is Stetson, and calls out to him, نادى عليه. The man's reply, if there is one, okay, the man's reply, if there is one, goes unmentioned, okay. Fine. So the speaker and Stetson both represent the disillusioned survivors of World War I. بيتكلموا عن اللي هو حالة الضياع اللي كانوا عايشينها بعد ما نجوا من الحرب, and are unable to communicate except in reference to their shared traumatic past. وكل حديثهم مش عن about their life now or today, but about the traumatic past or the war that they went through. Now, I don't know where is that mentioned, but anyway, I'll mention it. He asks his friend Stetson if the corpse that he buried in his garden has grown up and flowered. Okay, so that was strange. We will come to it. Definitely it's somewhere here. Okay, likewise, in this disconnected modern world, intimacy and love have been reduced to mere physicality. So even if a young man and a woman are together, it's not they are not together because of love, romantic love. It's just for physicality, just to fulfill a desire. That's all. In the poem's third section, the fire sermon, a typist tidies her apartment before the arrival of her lover, but their sixth scene is anything but romantic. It stops short of rape. Okay, so it was similar to rape because she didn't like that. But the woman clearly dislikes the man. Once he leaves, because he thought that he was victorious to get what he wanted, she is glad he is gone. This scene again illustrates the poem's broader point that modern life alienates people from one another. So the first one is we saw the people like zombies, walking like zombies, and the two soldiers who met together, they had nothing to talk about but the past war and the killing in the past war. These two young people, the woman and the man, they are together just to fulfill a physical desire, but they don't have any romantic love. Modern life, the poem suggests, lacks culture and class, and this descent into vulgarity is part of what drives people apart. So because the people after the war, because they were exposed to horrible times, so the people by the time became vulgar. And this vulgarity, يعني كانوا سوقيين, they don't respect each other, they don't treat each other with culture and class, so that's why they actually went away from each other. Because if you don't want the people to hurt you with their words and their behaviors, then it's better for you to stay alone or to be away from them. Now, importantly, the inability to communicate or connect is true at all levels of society. In section 2, a wealthy, anxious woman pleads with the speaker to talk to her, but the speaker doesn't reply. Instead, he thinks unhappily to himself about their mundane, everyday routine, which does not bring him comfort. This suggests that the surface level details of modern life, the daily routine of hot water at 10 and if it rains, a closed car at 4, offer no real relief from its underlying despair and sense of isolation. So that, do you remember the woman from the high class who was sitting in the room waiting for her lover and talking to herself? She was living in a kind of routine. She wanted the speaker to talk to her, but he is busy with himself thinking about the routine of his life too. So their routine is actually just hot water at 10, I think, for drinking tea, and then when it rains, so it's the same life. It's the same life. The morning, in the morning they do the same thing every day, and in the afternoon it starts raining and they do the same thing every day. So this routine in life is killing, actually, is destroying. So, and it actually drags away any sense or meaning of this life and shows that the people are isolated from each other. They don't communicate with each other. In the poem's final section, however, Eliot moves away from scenes of everyday life. Instead, he uses imagery and metaphor to portray the modern world as a literal wasteland. الآن انتقل وبدأ يعرض لنا، هو طبعا في الأقسام الأولى كان يورينا كيف إنه الحياة wasteland أرض خراب by showing us the people in their daily life. الناس اللي بتتحرك على الجسر، الأصدقاء لو التقوا مع بعضهم، نساء لو التقوا يتناقشوا في موضوع، لو مرأة كانت بتفكر وبتحاول انها تتعامل مع حدا، اثنين شباب يعني صغار في يعني زوجان مع بعضهم. ف all these are reflections of daily life. Now he's taking us far away from everyday life to prove that this life is really waste life. Okay, so now is a wasteland. Now we go to a rocky, barren place without water or nourishment. الآن نقلنا لصورة مكان، المكان هذا مش مليان صخور، عقيم، ما فيش فيه حياة، ما فيش فيه water, no water, without water or nourishment. Where even connecting with God is a struggle. يعني حتى لو أنت كنت في هذا المكان وبتحاول أنك تتواصل مع ربك كمان it's difficult for you. This, the poem suggests, is the ultimate alienation from which all modern people suffer and the source of modern life's brokenness. Okay? So we live in a world which is tough, difficult, doesn't help us to fulfill our dreams or to achieve anything, to the extent that we are unable to connect with our God. And not being able to connect with a God, actually, if you remember, this is the spiritual griddle, so, or safety built around our spiritual life. That is another source of modern life brokenness and feeling actually sad and frustrated. Okay, so after talking about this disconnection and alienation that people suffer from, either among each other or between them and their God, we will come to the second theme, which is death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. So it was noticeable in the wasteland that death is everywhere, both literally and metaphorically. So as real death or metaphorical death. Okay, corpses litter the poem. Okay, while endings of all sorts represent death of a different kind throughout. إذا إحنا الموت واضح إنه هو متواجد بكثرة في القصيدة، سواء الجثث، أوكي، اللي بتذكر، إذا بتتذكروا الجثة اللي تم بيسألوا هل الجثة اللي زرعتها في حديقتك هل أنبتت السنة، أوكي، وفي عنا جثة في بلاس اللي هو السولجر اللي كانت it was decaying in the ocean. Also when he talks about the river Thames, he talks about the corpses there, okay. So corpses are everywhere in the poem, but also in the poem we have another type of death, okay, which is the ending, okay, of a story. So endings also are considered. For example, the ending of a love story. This is death, okay. So let's continue. So of a different kind throughout, even the people of the poem resemble the walking dead, the zombies, living lonely, unhappy lives. Nevertheless, though, the majority of the wasteland is preoccupied with death, something it presents as inevitable and inescapable. So death is inevitable and inescapable. The poem is not entirely without hope. Yes, we have death and we have many signs and symbols which remind us of death, but still the hope is not entirely without hope. Indeed, the poem ultimately suggests that death, however devastating, is a necessary stage on the way to rebirth and renewal. Only from the wreckage of a wasteland is a new beginning made possible. Okay, so death is not the end. It could be actually a transforming stage in which something new is to be born. So he here refers to the country after the World War. In the World War, many people got killed, but it is now the time to renew the life in the country. Now, one could fill many pages chronicling and making sense of all the things that die or come to an end in this poem. And there are many examples, similar to the examples that we show when we talked about the brokenness and isolation of modern life. This is what you need to summarize. Write the theme, okay? And under it, just one, 2 words or 3 words, how is this theme represented in the poem? For example, the brokenness of isolation of modern life, you write under it, number 1, for example, what are part of what we discussed previously, okay? So, for example, you talk about zombies, okay? You talk about fellow former soldier. You talk about what else? And so on. For example, the story of the 2 young men, okay? Or the lover's story, okay? And so on. So you just write under them, and then you can expand your ideas about each point, okay? Now the same thing here when you want to talk about death and rebirth. So you write under death, zombie, for example, the soldier in the ocean, okay? The corpus, the 2 friends talk about, okay, and so on. Fine. So where am I now? Okay. So yeah. So to name just a few, we will discuss them. A woman, Mary, mourns the end. This is the metaphorical death. Okay, she mourns the end of her childhood. So the corpus, the zombie, the body of the soldier in the ocean, those are the literal death, the real or the physical death. But we have the metaphorical death. You can under it write Mary, okay, Mary's childhood memories. Okay, so she is talking about the end of her childhood. The fortune teller, this is the second one, Madame Sosistress, issues warnings about death by water, okay? A corpse planted last year in your garden. This is the corpus I told you about between the 2. The soldier is telling his friend. Your garden, has it begun to sprout? هل بدأت تزهر? Marriages and romances fail. في كمان عندي marriages and romances fail. Women discuss abortion. Abortion is a death, it's an end. Girls lose their virginity. Nymphs have departed from the Thames. حتى الحوريات غادروا نهر التhames. طبعا this is an end. This is death of what used to be. Landscapes are ravaged by drought. A pub reaches closing time. Do you remember the bartender when he used to tell the 2 women, we are closing, time is up, we are closing? So this is an end. It is a reference to death, okay? And a sailor literally drowns. Even the poem's allusions are primarily associated with death, such as the repeated references to Dante's Divine Comedy, which involves a journey through hell. Okay, so you can find examples of death in the poem, okay? Classify them, the physical death, the metaphorical death. Then it will be easier for you to talk about them. Okay, now the poem suggests that the experience of death is universal, especially because the poem suggests that death needs not be understood literally. The end of a romance, for example, feels like death. So isn't that similar to our previous poem, okay, Musée de Beaux-Arts, okay, in which the tragedy, okay, and part of the tragedy is death, is universal and part of our human being nature, okay? So the same idea is reflected here with the wasteland. Now, the universality of this experience is made most explicit in section in section 4, the poem's shortest section, titled Death by Water. Its brevity draws attention to the poem's central message. ليه كان قصير السكشن هذا؟ Okay? Because he wanted to reflect the central message that the fate of Libas, the drowned sailor, who was once handsome and tall as you, awaits everyone. يعني خلص ملخص الحديث، ملخص الحياة هي نهايتها الموت. This is certainly true in the literal sense, since all people die, but is also true metaphorically because life is full of endings, as seen throughout the poem. So the death is not necessarily only the physical death, but the endings of many stories in our life. Okay, those endings actually reflect the death. But definitely, with the metaphorical death, after those endings, we have a new starts, right? Fine. However, the poem also suggests that each of these deaths and endings is a necessary pit stop on the road to rebirth. Okay, just a minute.